In this video, we're given the following 3 points in polar coordinate representations, and we're asked to plot them. So whenever we plot polar coordinates, they still live on the XY plane. So before we plot these specific points, let's just remind ourselves what it means to plot a polar coordinate. So the way in which we think about polar coordinates is we're given a distance r, the polar radius, and that tells us how far we are from the origin. So r basically tells us a distance straight from the origin that a point could be located. Now, to contrast that, what theta represents is a polar angle. Basically, what that tells us is the angle off of the x-axis in which that point could be located. So putting these two things together, for example, if we're given some point r comma theta, the way in which we can think about this point is that at some angle theta and at some distance r away from the origin, that point actually lives. So this in polar coordinates would be r theta. Again, some angle theta off of the origin or off of the x-axis and the distance r away from the origin at that particular angle. So if we next think about what does it mean to have a negative polar radius? Well, the negative polar radius, basically what that means is we flip over the origin. Another way of saying that is we take the angle that we're given and we actually add pi to it. So if we're thinking about this next point, which is a negative r comma theta, what that basically does is we take the point that we started with, that would be just positive r theta, and instead of just using that point, we flip that point across the origin. So our new point actually ends up a distance r away from the origin, but just at a different angle. So again, that's still r from the origin, but we're just at a different angle now. So this angle that we're at is basically the original angle plus pi. So this point down here in quadrant 3 is the point negative r theta. All right, so those couple of things just to remind ourselves. What does the polar radius mean? What does the polar angle mean? How can we think about negative polar radii and things like that? So let's get into the actual points that we care about. So in this case, the first point that we're going to think about is this point where the polar radius is 1.5 and the polar angle is pi over 4. So what that means is, since the polar radius is 1.5, we'll move a distance about 1.5 away from the origin. So just to clarify here, we can add, say that this number or this line represents 1, this line represents 2, and this radii represents 3 away. What that means is, for this distance of 1.5 from the origin, we'll basically be on some circle in between the radii 1 and 2. Now, the way in which we know what point along this circle to be is we're told a specific angle to move. So let's go ahead and move with that particular case. So we know from this information that we're going to be somewhere along this line, pi over 4, because again, that is what that angle is. But now we're also told what the distance is, 1.5. So we're going to be a distance 1.5 from the origin, which basically puts us at that point there. So this would be our point, 1.5 pi over 4. Again, we're at an angle of pi over 4 and a distance 1.5 from the origin. All right, let's take a look at the next point. So in the next point, we see a couple different things. We have a different polar radii, but now we have a negative polar or negative polar angle in this case. So what that means is instead of our angle moving from the positive x and going counterclockwise, we're going to move from the positive x and go clockwise. So in this case, if we're thinking about this polar angle of 2 pi over 3. Again, starting from the origin, we're going to be along some arc until we reach that angle of pi over 3, or negative 2 pi over 3, excuse me. So that's actually going to take us to the line somewhere on pi over 4 pi over 3, or negative 2 pi over 3. And then with the other information we're told is we want to be a distance 1 away from the origin. So again, starting at the origin, moving out a distance 1, that'll place us at the point here. So this value would be the point 1, negative 2 pi over 3. And as I quickly said earlier, or a moment ago, this angle we can think about as the angle from the positive x-axis going clockwise 2 pi over 3 radians. It's also equivalent to if we took the polar angle, started and going counterclockwise of 4 pi over 3 as well. All right, so let's move on to the last point. And this is the point, negative 2, 3 pi over 4. So first, let's just think about where 3 pi over 4 would set us. So if we move that angle from the positive x until we hit 3 pi over 4, that's going to place us in quadrant 2, somewhere along this particular angle. However, the other thing we note is we have a negative 2 here. So I just want to do this in 2 steps, actually. Step number 1, let's think about a slightly different point. Let's think about the point positive 2, 3 pi over 4. And the reason I want to do that, again, we know we're going to be somewhere along this 3 pi over 4 direction, but if we're thinking about a positive r value, what that means is we can extend from the origin a unit of 2 in that direction. So this point is not actually the point that we want, but this point is the point in which we have positive 2, 3 pi over 4. So now if you remember what happens when we have a negative polar radius, like we have in this case, what that does is we basically flip across the origin the same distance away from the origin, just along the angle now where we take 3 pi over 4 and basically add pi to it. So again, this minus sign says basically flip over the origin. But what we really do in practice is we take this angle of 3 pi over 4 and we add pi to it. That basically actually does the flipping over the origin. So again, we take this point, that's a distance of 2 away. We flip this across the origin. We will land in quadrant 4. At the point over here. So again, just to emphasize, this point has a distance of 2 from the origin. However, its angle is now 7 pi over 4 because we added pi to the original angle. So this is our point, negative 2, 3 pi over 4. It's also equivalent to the point positive 2, 7 pi over 4. So again, the big things to remember for plotting polar coordinates. The polar radii tells us the distance from the origin that we're going to move out. But the other information we need to know is the direction that we're moving away from the origin. And that's given by the polar angle. That tells us the direction or the angle off the x-axis that will move a certain distance r away from the origin. And the last thing, a negative polar radius flips us across the origin. Basically, we add pi to whatever the original angle was and move out the absolute value of r in that distance.